In the Western media, China and the US are often framed as polar opposites. China is apparently an ethnically homogenous, communist dictatorship, while America is apparently a nation of immigrants and the paradigmatic liberal democracy, the shining city on the hill. But in the past couple of years, we've seen somewhat of a convergence, especially on economic issues, and Trump has explicitly suggested copying elements of the Chinese system, including biannual rather than quarterly reporting and, quote, quick trials that Trump has apparently seen in China's criminal justice system. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how America is apparently becoming more like China, and vice versa. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's get straight into it. As we see it, there are at least 5 areas in which America seems to be converging with China. The first, and perhaps most significant, is economic policy. China and the US are sometimes thought of as economic opposites, the US as capitalist and China as communist or socialist. However, over the past decade or so, the state has begun to play an ever larger role in the American economy too. In Trump's first term, for instance, he imposed tariffs on China to protect certain American industries. While the CCP aren't generally that keen on tariffs, they use other protectionist tools like currency manipulation to protect their industry, and the overall effect is similar. Biden then took things up a notch. Not only did he keep most of Trump's tariffs in place, he also expanded them in certain areas, like electric vehicles, and passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which provided massive subsidies for essentially energy companies setting up shop in America. Biden also passed the CHIPS Act, which was designed to boost semiconductor manufacturing in the US by providing tax credits and grants. Again, this is very similar to China, where rather than the free market, the government decides what industries it wants to support and implements policies to those ends. Made in China 2025, for instance, a 10-year industrial strategy outlined by the CCP in 2015, was all about helping Chinese industry move away from low-tech, labor-intensive industries like textiles to high-tech industries like semiconductors and 5G. Similarly, since 2023, Xi has been talking about new productive forces to describe the industries he wants to focus on after Made in China 2025, namely green technologies like electric vehicles, batteries, and renewable energy. Anyway, while Trump has wound down some of the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies for green energy, he's obviously imposed unprecedented tariffs on basically all of America's major trading partners, and has even started up buying stakes in individual companies that his administration deems strategically valuable. This first happened in July when the Pentagon quietly took a 15% stake in MP Materials, an American company focused on rare earth mining and processing. For context, rare earths are a group of chemical elements used in most modern technologies. Now, China currently dominates across the entire rare earth supply chain and has been willing to weaponize this dominance by restricting exports in its ongoing trade war with the US. The Trump administration is presumably hoping that a partnership with MP Materials will help the US develop a domestic rare earth industry. In August, the US then took a 10% stake in Intel, presumably to help the US develop or maintain a domestic semiconductor industry. And then in October, the US signaled it was going to take a 5% stake in Lithium Americas, a US company focused on, you guessed it, lithium production, as well as a 10% stake in Trilogy Metals, a Canadian company focused on mining copper, zinc, and cobalt in Alaska. This is pretty unprecedented. Previous US administrations have generally avoided taking stakes in private companies, and when they have, it's usually been in the context of a bailout. It's obviously something the Chinese have been doing for decades, though. Most of the big companies in China are at least partly state-owned, although it's worth noting that the private sector's role in the Chinese economy has grown over time. In this sense, the two countries are apparently converging. In providing support to selected industries, usually in manufacturing, and taking equity stakes in private companies, America's economic policy is starting to look more like China, while the expansion of the private sector is making China's economy look more like America's. Anyway, the second area in which the US is starting to look more like China is the distribution of political power. In short, political power in the US is increasingly being centralized in Washington, and especially in the presidency. This trend has obviously accelerated under Trump, who has actively tried to circumvent the usual checks and balances and, like Xi, purged any institutional opposition. But it also precedes Trump. In fact, the power of the presidency has been steadily expanding since at least the 60s, as successive presidents have abused ambiguities in the Constitution to advance what Arthur Schlesinger famously described as the imperial presidency. The president's office, which originally just included a handful of staff, has swollen into a full-on bureaucracy, while 9/11 and other crises allow Bush and his successors to massively extend executive authority over questions of quote-unquote national security. As power centralizes, America increasingly resembles China, where Beijing, and especially Xi, calls the shots. The third area is foreign policy. While it's been pretty unsuccessful thus far, Trump and many other American politicians clearly wants to extricate the US from its various foreign entanglements, and are less interested than they used to be in spreading democracy, or nation building. This sounds quite a lot like the Chinese foreign policy principle of non-interference, which basically means not getting involved in foreign conflicts, and not judging other countries' systems of government. Moreover, Trump seems to be focused on what he apparently sees as America's sphere of influence in the Americas, hence his aggressive posture towards countries like Canada, Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia, as well as his willingness to intervene in Argentina. Again, this mirrors China's foreign policy, which is generally focused on what the CCP presumably considered their sphere of influence, including Taiwan and the South China Sea. The fourth area is free speech. While the US is nowhere near China levels of censorship yet, the Trump administration has proved willing to monitor and restrict what people can say online, revoking visas for tweets that the administration deems anti-Semitic or insufficiently sympathetic to Charlie Kirk. Finally, the fifth area is immigration. Again, obviously the US has a more open immigration policy than China, but it has become markedly more restrictive under Trump, and at least some figures within the administration apparently believe that the US should adopt a more ethnic notion of citizenship. In a speech to the Claremont Institute earlier this year, for instance, J.D. Vance argued that, quote, people whose ancestors fought in the Civil War have a hell of a lot more claim over America than other nominal citizens. Of course, it's important not to overstate all of this, and in all of these areas, and especially the last two, there's still a lot of clear water. Nonetheless, there does seem to be some convergence, and it's an interesting way of framing the transformations we're currently seeing in American politics. Before you go, we've just announced our new coffee table book, Assembly Required. A 300-page book which highlights 27 of the world's most beautiful parliament buildings, from the classics like the British Parliament in Westminster, to the US Capitol or the Hungarian Parliament, to ones you might not expect, like New Zealand, Bhutan, or Bangladesh. For each parliament, we don't just show beautiful photos of these actually incredible buildings, we also tell you the stories behind the buildings, both through passages written by our team, as well as through detailed custom-designed floor plans and diagrams. We really did spend a long time on this too. We spent ages digging into the stories of parliament buildings all around the world, before narrowing it down to just the most interesting and beautiful buildings, writing tens of thousands of words to tell you their stories. We've also made both desk and wall calendars based on Assembly Required too, allowing you to experience these beautiful buildings year-round. Both are also double-sided, providing tons of bonus images for you to enjoy. If you're interested, you can click the link in the description to find out more. Plus, there's a whole load of bundles available if you want a good deal. Plus, if you do want a copy, then you can get 15% off anything Assembly Required by using the code ASSEMBLY. That code only lasts for this week, so if you're interested, now's your time. Anyway, this is just another way that you can help fund our journalism. So if you are interested, then your support will help us to continue investing in our journalism, as well as providing free content for years to come. So as always, thank you very much.